The air in the Sangan Valley tasted of dust and diesel. It was a fine, talcum-like powder that coated the tongue, clogged the sinuses, and worked its way into every seam of Captain Eva Rostova's uniform. She rode in the back of the M-Rapi, her knuckles white on the grip of her M4, a weapon she carried with the awkwardness of a surgeon, not a soldier. Outside, the sun beat down on the beige, unforgiving landscape, turning the armored vehicle into a convection oven. Across from her sat Lieutenant Nathan Miller. He was barely 23, with the faint shadow of a first mustache on his upper lip and a map of nervous energy in his constantly jiggling knee. He was the platoon leader, the general's son, and he was trying very hard not to look as terrified as he clearly felt. "You good back there, Captain?" he called over the engine's roar. "Just another day at the office, Lieutenant," Eva replied, her voice flat. Her office was wherever the bleeding was. Today, it was this rolling metal box in the heart of the hornet's nest. Their mission was a simple hearts and minds visit to a local elder. Simple missions were the ones that got you killed. The world vanished in a flash of white light and a sound that wasn't heard but felt. A violent, physical blow that punched the air from her lungs. The M-Rap lurched sideways, a tortured shriek of metal filling the cabin. Smoke and the acrid smell of burnt explosives flooded the space. Chaos erupted. Shouts, groans, the metallic clatter of equipment hitting the floor. Eva's training took over, a calm, cold switch flipping in her brain. Her ears were ringing, but her eyes were clear. She saw Lieutenant Miller, dazed, directly in the path of the vehicle's twisted hatch, which was peeling inward like a sardine can lid. Outside, she heard the distinctive chatter of small arms fire. A complex ambush. The IED was just the dinner bell. Another explosion, closer this time, rocked the ground. A secondary device, meant for the dismounts. Through the smoke, she saw the searing orange dot of an RPG streaking toward their crippled vehicle. There was no time for a warning, no time to think. There was only instinct. Eva launched herself from her seat. She collided with Lieutenant Miller, her shoulder driving into his chest, knocking him flat onto the deck. She landed on top of him, curling her body over his, making her back a shield. The world exploded again. A wave of heat and force slammed into her, a hailstorm of shrapnel peppering her back and legs. The pain was immediate and blistering, 1,000 tiny, white-hot needles. Then, for a moment, everything went dark. She came to seconds later, the taste of blood and dust in her mouth. Her head throbbed, a deep, concussive ache. Below her, Miller was stirring, coughing. "You okay, Lieutenant?" she grunted, the words a monumental effort. I think so. Captain, you're bleeding." "Everyone's bleeding," she said, pushing herself up. A wave of dizziness washed over her, but she locked her knees. The firefight was still raging outside. Inside, she had work to do. Ignoring the fire in her own body, she grabbed her aid bag. "Status report!" she yelled, her voice raw. One by one, the wounded responded. Her hands were a blur, applying tourniquets, packing wounds, slapping on chest seals. She moved with an economy of motion that was both mesmerizing and terrifying, a dance of life-saving in a theater of death. She was no soldier, but in this moment, she was the most important person in the valley. The next day was a blur of debriefings and medical evaluations. She was diagnosed with a moderate concussion, given a dozen stitches for the deeper shrapnel wounds in her back, and ordered to take it easy. But at 1600 hours, A runner appeared at her cot. "Captain Rostova, General Miller wants to see you. Now." She limped to the command center, her uniform immaculate, but her body screaming in protest. General Miller stood behind a large oak desk, a formidable man with a face carved from granite and eyes that had seen too much. He was a force of nature, a man who moved divisions with a word. Today, he looked like a father. "Captain," he began, his voice a low rumble. He gestured to a chair. "Sit." Eva sat, her back protesting with a fresh wave of pain. "The doctors tell me you're going to be fine. They also tell me my son is alive, without a scratch on him, because you used your own body as a shield. Is that correct?" "I just reacted, sir. I did what anyone would have." "No," the general said, his voice sharp. "No, they wouldn't have. I've read your file, Captain. Top of your class at Johns Hopkins. A fellowship in trauma surgery that most doctors would kill for. You're overqualified for this deployment, and you still put yourself in the line of fire for one of my lieutenants." He paused, looking out the T-wall window at the dusty fob. "I don't know how to properly thank a person for saving my son's life." "No thanks are necessary, sir. It's my job to save people." "Perhaps," Miller said, turning back to her. His eyes were intense. "I saw your after-action report. You triaged and stabilized 6 critical casualties, including yourself, in the middle of a firefight. That's not just a doctor, Captain. That's a leader." He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "The MASH unit here, the 477th, is underperforming. The commander, Major Davies, is a procedural man. He's not a leader. Morale is low, and so are their success rates. I'm making a change." Eva's heart began to pound. She had no idea where this was going. "Major Davies is being reassigned. Effective tomorrow at 0600. You are in command of the 4077th. The air left Eva's lungs. It was a field promotion, a jump of a half-dozen ranks in terms of responsibility. Command? She was a surgeon. She knew anatomy, not administration. "Sir, I'm honored, but I don't have any command experience." "You have experience that matters," General Miller countered, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You know what those soldiers need because you've been out there with them. You've bled with them. You saved my son, Captain. The least I can do is give you the chance to save a few more. Don't let me down." She walked out of the command center, stunned, the general's words echoing in her ears. Her body ached, but her spirit soared. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. A chance to build something, to run a unit her way, to save lives on a scale she'd only dreamed of. It was a blessing, a gift from a grateful father. She couldn't see the Trojan horse for the gleaming, glorious wood it was made of. The gleaming promise of the general's office faded the moment Eva stepped through the swinging doors of the MASH 4077th. The air hung thick and stagnant with the smell of stale coffee, antiseptic, and something else, the faint, cloying odor of decay. Not of the body, but of the spirit. A bank of fluorescent lights overhead buzzed and flickered, casting a sickly yellow pallor on the peeling paint and scuffed linoleum floors. The staff she passed in the hallway moved with a lethargic shuffle, their eyes downcast, their shoulders slumped in a permanent state of defeat. This wasn't a well-oiled machine. It was a machine that had been left to rust in the rain. A man with thinning hair and a sour disposition approached her, his name tag reading Davies. Major Davies. He was shorter than she expected, with a soft paunch that strained the buttons of his uniform. He gave her a limp, dismissive handshake. His eyes, small and cold, raked over her, noting her limp, the fresh stitches peeking from her collar. Captain Rostova, he said, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. Welcome to the 477th, or what's left of it.
Major, I look forward to working with you during the transition, Ava said, trying to inject a note of professional courtesy into the chilly atmosphere.
Davies offered a thin, mirthless smile. The transition is complete, Captain. My orders are to be on a transport in 2 hours. The General, it seems, prefers expediency. The sarcasm was a palpable thing. Let me give you the 50-cent tour. He walked her through the unit, his voice a droning monologue of deficiency. This is the OR. We have 2 functional tables. The third one's hydraulics have been shot for a month. Requisition for parts is on its 3rd round of signatory approvals. This is our primary ventilator. The backup is temperamental. Supply says it's not a priority replacement. Over here is our blood bank. It's stocked according to Regulation 45, subsection B, which, as you know, dictates stock levels based on the prior quarter's consumption rates, not on projected operational tempo. He was drowning her in jargon, a subtle form of intellectual bullying designed to make her feel small, to highlight her inexperience. He wasn't just handing over a unit. He was building a case for her inevitable failure. As they passed the nurses' station, a few of the staff looked up. Davies paused, raising his voice just enough for them to hear. Everyone, this is Captain Rostova. She'll be my replacement. Seems she made quite an impression on General Miller. She's the General's new favorite. The words landed like a volley of stones. The faces of the nurses and corpsmen shuddered, their expressions shifting from weary indifference to guarded suspicion. He had just painted a target on her back. She wasn't their new commander. She was the political appointee, the teacher's pet who got the job through favoritism, not merit. After Davies departed, leaving a bad taste in the air, Eva convened a meeting with her new section heads. She laid out her vision: better response times, proactive supply management, a focus on patient outcomes over paperwork. She was met with blank stares and non-committal nods. Her first test came that afternoon. A pre-op report showed their supply of O-negative blood. The universal donor, the lifeblood of any trauma unit, was critically low. "Why haven't we ordered more?" she asked the supply NCO, a grizzled sergeant named Peterson, who looked like he'd been part of the building's foundation. "Emergency resupply request requires a Form 88R, Captain," he said, not looking up from his crossword puzzle. "Signed by you, countersigned by the FOB's chief medical officer." "Okay, get me the form." He slid it across the desk. She signed it. "Where's the chief medical officer?" "In Bagram, Captain. He only reviews emergency requests on Mondays and Thursdays." "It's Tuesday, Sergeant." "Yes, ma'am." "So we wait 2 days for the most important resource we have?" she asked, incredulous. Peterson finally looked at her, his eyes weary. "That's the procedure. Major Davies always said, 'Procedure keeps us safe.'" "Procedure is going to get someone killed," she shot back. Frustrated, she tried a different approach. She found the number for the FOB logistics officer, a major on the other end of a crackling phone line. She explained the situation. "I can't expedite a blood shipment without a priority code from Medlog Command," the major said impatiently. "How do I get that?" "You have to fill out a Form 2A supplemental, justifying the deviation from standard supply schedules." "And where do I get that form?" "You should have it. Major Davies was sent a whole packet of them last month." Of course he was. Eva spent the next hour tearing apart Davies' old office. She finally found the packet, tucked away at the bottom of a locked file cabinet he hadn't left her the key for. She had to pry it open with a letter opener. By the time she had the forms filled out, it was too late to submit them. Another day wasted. It was a small thing, a single request for plasma, but it felt like being attacked by a swarm of paper hornets. Each sting was minor, but the cumulative effect was maddening. Later that week, seeking a potential ally, she saw Lieutenant Miller in the mess hall. He was the reason she was here. Surely he would understand. "Lieutenant," she said, approaching his table. He flinched, almost spilling his coffee. He shot a nervous glance around the room before standing up. "Captain Rostova, ma'am." He looked everywhere but at her. "I was hoping we could talk," she said gently. "Ma'am, I'm not sure that's a good idea," he stammered, his face pale. "My father was very clear. He said it wouldn't look right. For us to be seen talking. It would just confirm the rumors." "What rumors?" Eva asked, though she already knew the answer. "That your command was some kind of quid pro quo," he mumbled, shuffling his feet. "He wants me to keep my distance, to avoid the appearance of favoritism. I'm sorry, ma'am. I have to go." He practically fled the mess hall, leaving Eva standing alone with her tray of cooling food. The man whose life she had saved was now afraid to even be seen with her. The act that had earned her this command was a political stain she was forbidden from acknowledging. The walls were closing in. She was the commander of the 4077th, but she had never felt more isolated in her entire life. This wasn't a blessing. It was a cage, and the bars were made of red tape. The weeks that followed were a slow, grinding siege. Major Davies was gone physically, but his ghost haunted every corner of the MASH, a malevolent spirit of bureaucratic inertia. He had built a system designed not to function, but to protect itself. And Eva was the foreign body it was trying to reject. Her war was fought not with bullets, but with triplicate forms, deliberate misinterpretations of regulations, and the weaponized incompetence of a staff loyal to their former master. The first major battle came over a soldier named Corporal Jensen. He'd come in with a seemingly standard shrapnel wound to the thigh, but it wasn't healing right. The tissue was necrotic, smelling sickly sweet, and the infection was spreading with alarming speed. Eva recognized the signs of a rare, aggressive necrotizing fasciitis, likely caused by a specific soil-borne bacteria in the region. Their standard broad-spectrum antibiotics weren't touching it. She knew what she needed: a powerful last-resort antibiotic called colistin. It wasn't in their standard formulary. She put in an emergency request, flagging it as life-threatening. The request was kicked back within the hour. The denial came from a lieutenant colonel, a doctor sitting comfortably in a chair at Bagram Airfield, hundreds of miles from the front line. The reason cited: insufficient diagnostic evidence to warrant use of a high-toxicity medication. Furious, Eva got the colonel on a video call. His face appeared on the screen, smug and condescending. "Captain," he began, "your request is premature. You haven't even cultured the wound yet. Protocol dictates a 72-hour culture and sensitivity test before we escalate to a drug like colistin." "Colonel, with all due respect, this soldier doesn't have 72 hours, Eva pleaded, keeping her voice as steady as she could. "I'm looking at his leg right now. The necrosis is spreading by the centimeter. I know what this is. By the time the culture comes back, he'll be dead, or he'll lose the leg." "Are you questioning my judgment, Captain?" the colonel asked, his voice hardening. "I've seen your file. You're a trauma surgeon, not an infectious disease specialist. And frankly, I've also seen the report from Major Davies on the state of the 4077th before he left. He noted a tendency toward hasty and unorthodox decision-making." Davies. Of course. He had salted the earth before he left, poisoning her reputation up the entire chain of command. "Colonel, this isn't about unorthodox decisions. This is about saving a soldier's life." "Then follow the procedure," he said curtly. "Send the culture. I'll review it when it comes in. Colonel out." The screen went blank. Ava felt a surge of white-hot rage. She was fighting a doctor who was hiding behind a rule book. For 2 agonizing days, she did everything she could to keep Jensen stable, watching helplessly as the infection crept higher up his leg. On the 3rd day, the culture results came back, confirming her diagnosis. She resent the request with the proof. The colistin arrived 12 hours later. They saved Jensen's life, but not his leg. It had to be amputated at the hip. He would live, but a part of him was gone forever because of a bureaucrat and a ghost. The sabotage grew more direct. One sweltering afternoon, during a complex chest surgery, the lights in the OR flickered and died. The main generator had failed. "Switch to backup power," Eva yelled, not looking up from the patient's open chest cavity. A moment later, her head nurse, a formidable but deeply cynical woman named Sergeant Bell, replied, her voice tight. "Backup's not kicking in, Captain." They finished the delicate procedure by the narrow beams of flashlights held by trembling corpsemen. It was a tense, nightmarish hour. Afterward, Eva stormed into the motor pool. The supply sergeant, Peterson, the same man from her first day, shrugged. "Generator's been acting up for weeks, ma'am. Major Davies put in a requisition for a new capacitor. Must not have come in yet." Eva didn't believe him. She spent the night digging through the supply office, fueled by coffee and fury. In the back of a dusty cabinet, shoved under a stack of old manifests, she found it. The requisition form for the new capacitor, properly filled out and dated 6 weeks prior, and clipped to it a delivery receipt showing the part had arrived 2 weeks ago. It had been signed for by Sergeant Peterson. The part was sitting on a shelf, deliberately uninstalled. When she confronted him, he just stared at her with dead eyes. "My mistake, ma'am," was all he said. There was no way to prove it was intentional. It was her word against his, and she was still the outsider. The final cut was the most insidious. Davies, who had been reassigned to a mind-numbing desk job at the main FOB, was using his time to poison the well. Rumors began to circulate. "Captain Rostova is reckless. She's in over her head. She only got the job because she's sleeping with one of the pilots." The lies were designed to isolate her, to erode her authority from within. The breaking point came with Sergeant Bell. For weeks, the head nurse had followed Eva's orders with a clipped, professional distance, her face an unreadable mask. One day, after a particularly grueling session in the OR, Bell cornered her in the scrub room. "They're saying you pulled strings to get this post," Bell said, her voice a low challenge. "That you don't care about regulations. That you're going to get us all court-martialed." Eva was exhausted, emotionally raw, and at the end of her rope. She turned to face the older woman, her eyes blazing. "Do you think I care about regulations when I have a soldier bleeding out on my table? Do you think I give a damn about strings when I'm trying to get a ventilator that works? Major Davies cared about regulations, and under his command this unit had the highest patient mortality rate on the continent. So you can either believe the rumors from a man who failed this unit, or you can look at what I am trying to do here and help me." Sergeant Bell stared at her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. For the first time, Eva saw a flicker of something behind the cynicism. It wasn't belief, not yet, but it was doubt. Doubt in the narrative Davies had so carefully constructed. Pushed to her absolute limit, Eva decided to go over everyone's heads. She requested a secure video conference with General Miller. It took 3 days to get a 10-minute slot. When his face appeared on the screen, He looked tired and annoyed. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She laid out everything: the denied medical requests, the generator, the supply sabotage, the impact on soldier care. She presented it as a problem of logistics and personnel, a threat to his mission. The general listened, his expression hardening. When she finished, he was silent for a moment. She expected questions, a promise of an investigation, something. Instead, he leaned into the camera, his eyes like chips of ice. "Let me be clear, Captain," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I put you in that position because I thought you were a leader. I saw initiative. I saw someone who could handle a crisis. Instead, you bring me a list of complaints. You sound like every other field-grade officer who can't manage their own people." "Sir, this is sabotage," she started, but he cut her off. "This is command. It's always messy. You think you're the first officer to deal with a resentful subordinate or supply chain issues? I gave you the authority, Captain. I am not going to hold your hand while you use it. Leaders solve problems. They don't whine about them. Do your job." The connection went dead. Eva sat alone in the silent communications tent, the general's words hanging in the air like poison gas. He hadn't just dismissed her. He had twisted her plea for help into a sign of weakness. The man who had given her this command, this blessing, had just slammed the door in her face. The betrayal was absolute. She was completely, utterly on her own. The war of 1,000 cuts was about to reach its bloody climax. The call came just after midnight. A disembodied voice crackling over the radio, laced with panic. "Mascal, Mascal, Mascal. Convoy Phoenix hit. IED and complex ambush. I say again, Mascal." Mass casualty. The two words every field hospital dreads. Eva was already on her feet, pulling on her scrubs, her mind racing. "Get me a count," she yelled to the radio operator as she ran toward the ER. 6 critical, 4 urgent, multiple walking wounded. First bird is 5 mics out. The 4077th exploded into a frenzy of controlled chaos. Eva barked orders, her voice cutting through the rising panic. "Prep or 1 and 2. I want blood warmers running. ONEG on standby. Bell, I want your best nurses in triage. Peterson, get your people down to the landing pad to help unload." But the machine she was trying to command was already sputtering. The little cuts, the 1,000 points of failure Davies had engineered, were about to converge into a catastrophic hemorrhage. The first helicopter landed, its rotors whipping up a storm of dust. The casualties poured in, a sight of broken bodies and desperate pain. Ava's triage was brutal and swift. This one to the OR. This one needs chest tubes now. This one is expectant. Black tag. The hardest decision a doctor ever has to make. The first critical patient was a young Marine, his chest a mangled ruin. "He needs a ventilator now!" Eva yelled. A corpsman wheeled over the primary unit and hooked it up. A moment later, another soldier was brought in, gasping for air, his lungs filling with blood. "Get him on the backup vent." Sergeant Bell's face was pale. "Captain, the backup is dead. It won't turn on. Peterson said the engineers were supposed to look at it yesterday." Yesterday. Another mistake. Another delay. "Then bag him manually," Ava commanded, her mind already moving on. They had 2 more critical chest wounds incoming. In OR1, the surgeon was fighting to save a soldier with massive abdominal injuries. "I need more ONEG in here," he shouted. "We're running dry." Eva patched into the comms. "Blood bank, what's your status on ONEG?" The reply from the young specialist on duty was hesitant. "Ma'am, we only have 2 units left. The resupply you ordered. There was a filing error on the form. It was rejected." Ava's blood ran cold. The form she had triple-checked. the form that was supposed to save them from this exact scenario. A filing error. It was Davy's ghost laughing at her from the grave he'd dug for her career. The doors to the ER burst open again. 2 more litters. The medics were bagging both soldiers furiously. One was the convoy commander, a captain with shrapnel in his neck and chest. The other was a private, barely 18, his face ashen, a massive wound in his side. Both were circling the drain. Both needed a ventilator and an operating table immediately. Eva looked at her resources. 1 working ore table, 1 working ventilator, 2 dying men. The surgeon from ore. 1 appeared at her elbow. "The first patient is stabilized, Captain. Ore is ready for the next one." It was an impossible choice, a scenario designed in hell. The captain was a leader, valuable, with a higher chance of survival given the nature of his wounds. The private was younger, his injuries more severe, his chances slimmer. Military triage protocol was clear. You use your limited resources on the patient most likely to survive. It was a cold, brutal calculus. But looking at the private's youthful face, a face that should have been worrying about girls and cars, not dying in the dust, the calculus failed. But she was a commander. She had to make the call. "Take the captain," she said, her voice sounding hollow to her own ears. "Get him to the OR, ventilator, chest tubes, and prep him for surgery." She turned to the private, grabbing a bag valve mask herself. "Let's see what we can do for him here," she said, her team moving around her. They worked feverishly, trying to stabilize him on the gurney, but they were losing him. His blood pressure bottomed out. His heart stopped. They did CPR for 20 minutes, but it was no use. Eva called it. Time of death. So 1:47. She stood over the young soldier's body, her hands covered in his blood. A profound and sickening silence falling over her small corner of the ER. She had followed protocol. She had made the right choice. And a boy was dead because of it. She didn't even have time to process it. As her team was cleaning up, 2 figures entered the ER. One was a military police officer, his face grim and impassive. The other was Major Davies. He wasn't in his rumpled duty uniform. He was wearing crisp, pressed fatigues, an air of smug authority radiating from him. He had been waiting for this. He had engineered it. "Captain Rostova," Davies said, his voice dripping with false solemnity. "By order of the theater command surgeon, I am here to conduct a preliminary inquiry into a preventable death." He held up a tablet, displaying a signed document. "I have sworn statements from supply personnel regarding your failure to maintain adequate blood stores. I have the maintenance logs showing your neglect of critical equipment, and now I have a dead soldier, a private who, it seems, was denied life-saving equipment in favor of a higher-ranking officer." He was twisting the facts into a perfect narrative of her incompetence. He was painting her impossible choice as criminal negligence. "Major Davies, I am relieving you of your command of the 4077th, pending a full Article 15 investigation into dereliction of duty and medical malpractice," he announced, his voice loud enough for the entire exhausted, blood-spattered staff to hear. "The MPs will escort you to your quarters. You are not to speak with any member of this unit. You are, for all intents and purposes, under arrest." The MPs stepped forward. Eva looked from Davies' triumphant face to the stunned expressions of her team, and finally to the body bag being zipped over the young private. She had been given an impossible job, set up to fail, and the trap had just sprung perfectly. She had lost. Confined to her small, featureless room, Eva felt the weight of her defeat settle over her like a burial shroud. The silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the controlled chaos she thrived in. They had taken her command, her purpose, her identity. She was no longer a doctor or a commander. She was a suspect. Davies had won. He had used the system like a weapon, and she had walked right into its path. Despair, cold and heavy, began to set in. A soft knock on her door startled her. It was forbidden for anyone to speak to her. She ignored it. The knock came again, more insistent. Cautiously, she opened it a crack. Standing there, shifting nervously, was PFC Chen, a young corpsman who usually worked in the supply bay. He was barely out of his teens and always seemed terrified of his own shadow. "Ma'am? Captain?" he whispered, thrusting a data stick into her hand. I couldn't let him do it." "Do what, Chen? What is this?" Eva asked, pulling him inside. "Sergeant Peterson. He made me file the blood resupply form, the one for the O-neg," Chen said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "He told me to deliberately use the old fiscal code, said the new one hadn't been circulated yet. He knew it would get rejected. I heard him on the phone with Major Davies last week. I thought it was just barracks talk. But then tonight happened." He looked down, ashamed. "The security camera in the supply office records audio. It's all on there, ma'am. The call. Peterson telling me to use the wrong code. All of it." A jolt went through Eva, a flicker of electricity in the deadened landscape of her spirit. It was proof. Hard proof. Before she could even process it, another knock came. This time it was Sergeant Bell. The head nurse's face was a mask of cold fury. She didn't wait for an invitation, pushing past Chen into the room. "I knew that bastard Davies was a snake," she spat, her usual cynicism replaced by righteous anger. "But I never thought he'd kill his own men to prove a point." She slapped a maintenance tablet onto Eva's small desk. "Peterson wasn't the only one. The engineer who was supposed to fix the backup ventilator, he's one of Davies's old cronies. I pulled the maintenance logs. He signed off that the ventilator was repaired and operational yesterday morning at 0800. He lied. He never even touched it. It's a falsified official record." Eva stared at the data stick in her hand, then at the tablet. The proof of a conspiracy. A deliberate, malicious plot to sabotage her command. A plot that had directly resulted in the death of a soldier. It wasn't incompetence. It was murder by bureaucracy. The fire that had been extinguished in her was reignited, hotter and purer than before. This was no longer about her career. It was about justice for the private who died on her floor. She knew the investigators would bury this in paperwork for weeks. Davies would use the time to cover his tracks. She had one shot. "Bell, Chen, you two are taking an incredible risk," Eva said, her voice low and steady. "You know that, right?" "He left that kid to die, Captain," Bell said, her eyes hard as steel. "There are some things you don't stand by and watch. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to the top of the food chain," Eva replied. She walked out of her quarters, ignoring the confused look from the MP stationed outside her door. She strode across the fob as if she still owned it, a woman on a holy mission. She didn't stop at the investigator's office. She didn't stop at the legal department. She walked straight to the command center, the nerve center of the entire operation. The general's aide, a prim and proper major, tried to stop her at the door to the inner office. "Captain, you can't go in there. The general is in a meeting." Eva didn't even break stride. "I have evidence critical to the security of this command, Major. Get out of my way." She pushed the door open and walked in. General Miller was standing over a large tactical map, deep in conversation with his son, Lieutenant Nathan Miller. Both men looked up, stunned at her intrusion. "Rostova!" the general bellowed, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "What is the meaning of this? I'll have you in Leavenworth." You might want to wait on that, sir, Ava said, her voice ringing with cold, hard fury. She threw the data stick and the maintenance tablet onto the polished surface of his desk. They landed with a clatter that echoed in the sudden silence. That is proof, General. Proof that Major Davies and his cronies deliberately sabotaged the 4077th's critical medical equipment and supplies. It's audio from a security camera of Sergeant Peterson being ordered to file false paperwork to block a blood shipment. It's a falsified maintenance log for the ventilator that failed last night. Major Davies didn't just file a complaint. Against me, sir. He orchestrated the entire disaster. He murdered that private as surely as if he'd shot him himself, all to settle a grudge. The general stared at the evidence, his face unreadable, his mind clearly racing through the political calculus. But before he could speak, his son stepped forward. Nathan Miller's face was pale, his hands trembling. He looked from Eva to the evidence, and then to his father. The guilt he'd been carrying for weeks had finally reached its breaking point. She's telling the truth, Dad, Nathan said, his voice cracking. I've heard the talk. I've seen what they've been doing to her. She saved my life, and you fed her to the wolves. You put her in charge and then let them crucify her because you didn't want to deal with the mess. This is your fault. The accusation, coming from his own son in front of another officer, was the one blow the general could not parry. It wasn't about regulations or reports anymore. It was about his honor, his family, his legacy. Publicly shamed by the very son whose life Eva had saved, he was cornered. His transformation was immediate. The politician vanished, replaced by the decisive commander. He stabbed a finger at the intercom on his desk. Get me the provost marshal and the head of the Criminal Investigation Division. Now. The reckoning was swift and brutal. Within hours, Major Davies, Sergeant Peterson, and the complicit engineer were in custody, their careers and lives in ruins. General Miller, his reputation on the line, moved heaven and earth. A fleet of transport planes was diverted. The 4077th was flooded with brand new equipment, ventilators, operating tables, diagnostic machines. The supply shortages vanished overnight. 2 days later, Ava Rostova stood in her new, state-of-the-art operating room. A formal letter of apology from the general lay on her desk, along with a commendation for actions under extreme duress. The investigation against her had been expunged. Her command was absolute. The doors swung open, and Sergeant Bell walked in. First casualties from the morning patrol are inbound, Captain. 2 critical. Ava looked around at the bright new lights, the gleaming steel, the loyal faces of her team, who now looked at her with a fierce, unwavering respect. She had fought the system and won. She wasn't the same idealistic doctor who had arrived weeks ago. She was a commander, forged in the fires of betrayal and tempered by the cold steel of bureaucracy. She picked up a sterile mask and tied it securely behind her head. "Let's get to work," she said, her voice calm, clear, and in control.